poor girl walks barefoot on the cold pavement. The young billionaire approaches and asks, "Don't your feet hurt?" She answers, "They don't hurt anymore. They've gotten used to it." And he starts to cry when he sees her heels. Caleb hated the traffic lights on Fifth Avenue. They always seemed to take forever. 45 seconds that felt like an eternity inside his silver Audi, with the air conditioning on full blast and jazz on the radio. He drummed his fingers on the leather steering wheel and glanced at the clock, 6:37 p.m. The sky was glowing orange as the sun disappeared behind the buildings. His life ran on an impeccable routine. Meetings at 9, lunch at noon, phone calls at 2 noon, then returning to his empty apartment, where a glass of whiskey waited for him. 28 years old, heir to a fortune he couldn't spend in 3 lifetimes, and nothing to do but watch the second hand tick by. When the light turned green, he didn't hit the gas right away. Something on the opposite sidewalk had caught his eye. A girl, she couldn't have been older than 10, was crossing the street hand in hand with a dog so skinny that its ribs were visible even from that distance. She had no shoes on. Horns blared behind him. Caleb reflexively pressed the accelerator, but his eyes stayed on the rearview mirror. The girl had dark, tangled hair and a faded dress that looked 2 sizes too big for her thin frame. The dog limped slightly, trailing after her like a faithful shadow. That image stuck in his mind as he drove through the familiar streets. In his world, children wore private school uniforms and held hands with uniformed nannies. They didn't cross busy avenues barefoot, accompanied by nothing but skeletal dogs. Without thinking twice, Caleb made a U-turn at the first chance. Something about that scene was pulling him back. Traffic was worse now, and by the time he got back to the place where he'd seen the girl, almost 20 minutes had passed. He parked haphazardly, ignoring the no-stopping sign and the parking attendant offering to watch the car. "Did you see a little girl?" he asked an older woman arranging fruit at an improvised stand. "Barefoot, with a skinny dog." The woman eyed him with suspicion. "Lots of kids pass by here, sir." Caleb walked down the sidewalk, looking into alleys and store entrances. He felt ridiculous in his $3,000 Italian suit, asking around about a homeless girl. Some people looked away, others watched him warily. A hot dog vendor only shrugged. Just as he was about to give up, he spotted her sitting by the entrance of a closed shop, about 100 yards away. He approached slowly, hoping not to startle her. The dog, lying at her side, lifted its head and let out a low growl. "It's all right," Caleb said, stopping a few steps away. "I just wanted to see if you're okay." The girl looked up. Her brown eyes were huge in her thin face. She showed no fear, only a calculated caution, as though she'd already learned to size up strangers out of necessity. "I'm fine," she said in a husky voice, as though she rarely used it. "Where are your shoes?" Caleb asked, noticing how small and dirty her feet were. A nearly imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I don't need them anymore. My feet don't hurt anymore." The simplicity of that statement hit him like a punch. Caleb knew pain, the pain of losing his parents too soon, of feeling empty even while having everything. But he'd never known the pain of bare feet on hot pavement, a pain that eventually went numb. "I could buy you some shoes," he offered, immediately feeling foolish. The girl didn't respond. She just petted the dog's head, which had stopped growling but kept its eyes fixed on Caleb. "What's your name?" He tried again. "Ellie." She hesitated. "And he's Max." "Do you have somewhere to stay, Ellie?" The question lingered for a few seconds. In the background, horns blared and people hurried by, oblivious to the scene, 2 worlds colliding on a grimy sidewalk. "We always have somewhere," she finally answered, getting to her feet. The dog followed her lead. "Come on, Max!" Before Caleb could say anything else, she was already walking away, melting into the crowd. The dog limped faithfully after her. Caleb stood there, watching until they disappeared. On his way back to his car, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, like waking from a long sleep. The people around him seemed different now. The buildings, shops, and expensive cars all felt blanketed in unreality. When he got into the Audi and turned on the engine, the silence inside suffocated him. He switched off the air conditioning and rolled the window down. The city's noise flooded in, alive and real. "My feet don't hurt anymore." The girl's words echoed in his mind, the adaptation to pain, the acceptance of suffering as a normal part of life. While he'd spent his days numb, awash in sterile comfort, that child had somehow found a strange peace in her hardship. Caleb drove aimlessly for the next few hours. For the first time in years, his penthouse apartment no longer felt like somewhere he wanted to return to. The memory of Ellie and Max crossing the street had cracked something inside him, like a pane of glass that, though intact, would never be the same after its first fracture. When he finally parked in his building's garage, it was past midnight. The doorman greeted him with his usual formality, but Caleb hardly noticed. His once methodical and predictable world now seemed out of alignment. He knew, with inexplicable certainty, that he would go back to that street, that he had to find Ellie again, not out of pity or charity, but because, for a few moments, through his car window, he'd caught a glimpse of something true. Caleb returned the next day. He parked his car in the same spot, checked his watch, 6:30 p.m., the same time he'd seen her before. He waited 1 hour, 2 hours, no sign of Ellie or Max. He came back the next day and the next and the one after that, each day arriving earlier and leaving later. The image of the barefoot girl and her skinny dog refused to leave his mind. During meetings, phone calls, and business dinners, she lingered in the back of his thoughts, her eyes too big for her small face. On the 5th day, instead of simply waiting in his car, he decided to walk around. The same fruit stand was there, run by the same woman with the distrustful expression. "Good morning," he greeted, trying to appear less intrusive than last time. He was wearing jeans and a simple shirt, nothing that would stand out. "I'm looking for a girl who comes by sometimes. Her name's Ellie. She has a dog called Max." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Why are you looking for her?" Caleb hesitated. He had no ready answer. Why was he looking for her? He wasn't even sure himself. "I want to help her," he said simply. The woman considered him for a few moments, then pointed toward the corner. "Try Samir's corner store." He let some kids take the leftovers of the day. The shop was a cramped little place tucked between a laundromat and a used cell phone store. A middle-aged man was arranging fruit at the entrance. Caleb walked up to him. "Excuse me, are you Samir?" The man nodded without looking up from his work. "I'm looking for a girl named Ellie, maybe 9 or 10. She has a skinny dog." "Oh, the girl with Max," Samir interrupted, finally glancing at him. "Haven't seen her for about 3 days. She used to show up for bread and milk at closing time." Caleb felt both relief and worry. Relief to confirm she was real and not a figment of his imagination. Worry because he had no idea where she might be. "Does she live around here?" Samir shrugged. "Kids like that don't have a fixed place. They come and go. She seemed more careful than most." Never took more than she needed. Over the following weeks, Caleb adopted a new routine. He got up, went to the office, took care of urgent matters, and by 4 in the afternoon, he was on the streets near 5th Avenue. He talked to store owners, night guards, delivery workers. Gradually, he built a fragmented map of Ellie's existence. A parking lot night watchman had seen her sleeping a few times under the awning of an abandoned commercial building. A diner owner mentioned that sometimes she showed up at closing to get a sandwich, always sharing it with that skinny dog. A man selling used books on the sidewalk said she stopped to look at children's books, but never touched them. Small traces of a life invisible to most who passed through those affluent streets. One evening, it was past 10 when Caleb found a group of kids sitting in a public playground. He approached carefully. "Hi," he said, keeping his distance so as not to frighten them. "Do you know a girl named Ellie? She has a skinny dog named Max." Their wary looks turned into barely masked hostility. "Why do you want to know?" asked an older boy, maybe 13. "I just want to help. I saw her a few weeks ago and—" "Help how?" The boy cut him off. "By taking her to some shelter where they'll separate her from the dog, or maybe to the cops." Caleb realized his mistake. In that world, distrust was a survival tool. "No, I just want to know if she's okay." A younger girl, who'd been silent until then, spoke. She was sick, coughing a lot. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. Where is she now? We don't rat on our own, the older boy said, standing up. Get out of here, man. Caleb backed away, grasping the message. He left a few $20 bills on the playground bench and left in silence. The search continued for another week. His frustration grew, mingled with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in years, Caleb felt driven by something beyond the inertia of his comfortable existence. His penthouse, with its expensive furniture and panoramic view, felt more and more like an empty stage set. Office meetings seemed like meaningless theater. He found himself watching people on the street, especially children with their parents, with a melancholy he couldn't name. One night, after yet another futile search, he sat on a park bench gazing at the city's starless sky. He took his wallet and looked at the photo of his parents he always carried, both of them smiling on a beach, years before the accident that took their lives. He'd been 12 when it happened, the same age Ellie seemed to be. He felt a hunger unlike any he'd felt before. Not a hunger for food, comfort, or even company. A hunger for purpose, for meaning. The girl and her dog had awakened something he hadn't realized was there. Returning home that night, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat in the darkness of his spacious living room, an untouched glass of whiskey on the coffee table. For the first time, he felt the true weight of the silence in his apartment, a silence belonging to a half-lived life. "Where are you, Ellie?" he whispered into the emptiness. That night, as he tried to sleep in his king-size bed under Egyptian cotton sheets, Caleb understood something his money could never buy. The emptiness he'd always felt was nothing compared to what he felt now. Knowing that somewhere in that same city, a girl named Ellie and a dog named Max were struggling to get through another day. And that realization, painful as it was, felt like the most real thing he'd felt in a very long time. It had been raining for 3 days straight. Caleb drove slowly, windshield wipers at maximum speed to handle the downpour. The streets were less crowded than usual, with people taking shelter wherever they could. It had been nearly a month since he first saw Ellie. His searches had become more spaced out, not from disinterest, but from the growing feeling that she might have left, changed areas, or worse, been taken somewhere. The uncertainty gnawed at him. That afternoon, with no pressing office matters, he decided to broaden his search. He drove beyond the commercial district and into less familiar streets. An overpass connected that part of the city to a more industrial area. Caleb slowed as he passed under the massive concrete structure. He parked and stayed in the car for a few minutes, watching the rain and the few pedestrians braving the downpour. The space under the overpass had become an improvised shelter for a handful of people. Caleb could see silhouettes shifting in the gloom. Something caught his eye, a familiar movement. Grabbing the umbrella from the back seat, he stepped into the rain. The sound of it drumming on the concrete formed a kind of acoustic curtain. He moved carefully among puddles and accumulated trash, and then he saw her. Ellie was sitting on a stack of cardboard, Max at her side. Her hair looked even more tangled than before, and her clothes were visibly dirty. She held a piece of bread, carefully splitting it into 2 portions, giving the bigger piece to the dog. Caleb's heart quickened. He stood there for a second, unsure how to approach. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't simply lurk and stare. He decided to act normal. He approached slowly, making enough noise so she would notice him before he got too close. Max was the first to see him. The dog raised his head, ears alert, but did not growl. He looked even skinnier than before, if that was possible. Ellie followed the dog's gaze and froze at the sight of Caleb. "Hi, Ellie," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "Remember me?" She nodded slowly, her large eyes taking in his every move. "You're the car guy," she rasped, her voice even hoarser than before. Caleb smiled, relieved she recognized him. "That's right. I've been looking for you for weeks." She frowned, looking confused. "Why?" The question, so simple and direct, caught him off guard. Why indeed? What could he say that wouldn't sound like pity or, worse, something suspect? "I was worried," he admitted honestly. "I wanted to see if you and Max were okay." Ellie looked at the dog, which had gone back to nibbling its piece of bread, seemingly deciding Caleb was no threat. "We're fine," she said. but a dry cough undercut her words. Caleb noticed she was trembling slightly, even though she was relatively shielded from the rain. Her thin dress looked damp around the edges. "You're cold," he noted, more statement than question. Ellie said nothing, simply rearranged her cardboard, trying to edge away from the encroaching dampness on the ground. "Mind if I sit?" Caleb asked, indicating a space nearby but not right next to her. She shrugged, an oddly adult gesture for someone so young. "The ground's not mine." Caleb closed his umbrella and sat on the cold concrete, keeping a distance that wouldn't make her feel threatened. From the backpack he carried, he pulled out a paper bag with a restaurant logo. "I brought something to eat. Want to share it with me?" Ellie's eyes locked on the bag, but she made no move to get it. Distrust was etched into every line of her small, grimy face. "What is it?" "Sandwiches, fruit, a bottle of juice," he said, opening the bag so she could see inside. "There's also some grilled chicken that I think Max might like." Hearing his name, the dog raised his head again. Ellie hesitated for a moment, then edged a bit closer, sliding her cardboard with her. Max followed faithfully. Caleb placed the bag between them and backed off, giving her room to take what she wanted. Ellie first pulled out the piece of chicken, offering it to Max, who gulped it down almost without chewing. Only then did she grab a sandwich for herself. "Thanks," she muttered, before taking a cautious bite. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the rain filling the space between them. Caleb noticed she ate slowly, as though trying to make the food last. Occasionally she coughed, a harsh sound from deep in her chest. "How long have you been sick?" he asked casually. "I'm not sick," she answered automatically, then added, "Just a little cough. It'll go away. You could see a doctor. I can take you." Ellie shook her head emphatically. "No, they'd take me." "Who?" "The social workers. They'll put me in a shelter." Caleb understood her fear. "And Max couldn't go." She nodded, stroking the dog's head. "He's all I've got." The bluntness of that statement hit Caleb hard. In a world where he owned everything, money, property, cars, investments, this girl possessed only a skinny dog and still saw that as everything. "How did you two meet?" he asked, genuinely interested. A slight smile appeared on Ellie's face, briefly lighting it up. "I found him in a dumpster behind a restaurant. He was just a puppy. Someone threw him away." She hugged the dog and he licked her face. "We found each other." "You look after him well," Caleb observed. "We look after each other," she corrected. Another few minutes of silence passed. The rain began to let up, shifting to a drizzle. Ellie finished her sandwich and carefully wrapped the apple Caleb had brought, tucking it into her dress pocket. "For later," she explained when she noticed him watching. "Ellie, where do you sleep?" She gestured vaguely around them. "Here. Sometimes over there," she said, pointing deeper under the overpass. "Depends on how many people there are." "What about before? Have you always lived like this?" The question emerged more clumsily than he intended, but Ellie didn't seem offended. "No. I used to live with my mom, in a little room, but there was a bed and a stove." Caleb waited for her to continue, without pressing. "One day she left for work and never came back. I waited a really long time." Her eyes fixed on a distant spot. "The landlady kicked me out after a while because the rent didn't get paid." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, feeling how inadequate it sounded. Ellie shrugged again. "Then I stayed with Donna. She was nice, showed me where to get food, where was safe to sleep." "Donna?" "An older lady who also lived on the streets. She had a lot of cats." A sad smile crossed her face. "But she got really sick last winter. One day she didn't wake up." The direct way Ellie spoke about such deep losses stunned Caleb. No self-pity, just acceptance, like someone who'd learned far too early that life marches on, regardless of tragedy. "Mr. She interrupted his thoughts. "Why are you still here?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean? Why are you looking for me? You're not a social worker. You're not the police." Her eyes studied him intently. "People like you don't talk to people like me." The blunt honesty of that observation left him momentarily speechless. Ellie was right. In his usual world, he would never have noticed a child like her. He would have walked by, maybe felt a fleeting pang of guilt, then forgotten all about it once he was home. "I don't exactly know how to explain," he finally said. "I guess, when I saw you that day, I realized something I'd been ignoring." "What?" Caleb thought for a moment. "That I have everything, yet nothing." Ellie frowned, looking confused. "How can someone have everything and nothing?" "It's hard to explain." He paused. "I have a big house, but no one to share it with. I have money, but nothing I really want to buy. I have..." He trailed off, hearing how ridiculous he sounded. "Sorry, must seem silly to you." To his surprise, Ellie didn't make fun of him. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Kinda like having a lot of food but not being hungry." The simplicity of that analogy impressed him. "Yes, something like that." Max stretched and yawned, apparently content after the chicken. He lay down with his head on Ellie's lap, and she reflexively started stroking his ears. "Winter's coming," she commented, changing the subject. "Nights will get colder," Caleb heard the worry in her voice. "You could stay somewhere warm. I have an apartment." "No," she cut him off. "We'll manage." "But people always want something back," she said, a bitterness far too old for her age. "No one helps for free." "I don't want anything in return, Ellie." She regarded him for a long moment. "Everybody wants something. Sometimes they just don't know it yet." The rain had finally stopped. The sun was peeking through the clouds, creating golden puddles on the wet asphalt. Some of the people sheltering under the overpass were starting to leave. "I've got to go," Ellie said, standing up. Max did the same, shaking off water in all directions. Caleb stood as well, feeling stiff from sitting on the cold ground for so long. "Can I come back tomorrow, bring more food?" Ellie hesitated. "You'd come, even if I said no, right?" Caleb couldn't help smiling. "Probably." Something that might have been a faint smile crossed her face. "Bring something for Max, too." "I promise." She turned to leave but looked back over her shoulder. "What's your name?" Caleb realized that in all this time he hadn't introduced himself. "Caleb." "See you tomorrow, Caleb." He watched her walk away, Max following faithfully. The image of the two of them shrinking against the city skyline, a slight girl and a skinny dog side by side, as if they were the only two creatures in the world, stirred something in him. On his way back home, Caleb stopped at a pharmacy to buy cough medicine, bandages, fever reducers. Then he went to a department store and purchased a thermal blanket, thick socks, a child's jacket. He considered shoes, but remembered what Ellie had said the first time they met. "My feet don't hurt anymore." For the first time in years, he went to bed without his nightly whiskey. And for the first time in ages, he felt the next day actually had a purpose. The storm began shortly after noon. It wasn't just any rain, it was the kind of tempest that turns streets into rivers, clogs storm drains, and forces drivers to take cover under awnings. The weather forecast warned of winds reaching nearly 60 miles an hour and possible hail. Caleb cancelled all his appointments and left the office in a rush. Traffic was chaotic. People ran for cover. Umbrellas buckled under the wind. He hadn't driven to work that day, so he caught a taxi and told the driver to head downtown. 3 weeks had passed since he'd found Ellie under the overpass. Since then, they'd established a steady routine. He appeared almost every day, always at the same time, always with food for both of them. Sometimes he brought clean clothes, cough medicine that refused to completely rid her of that cough, hygiene products. Ellie accepted them with the same mix of gratitude and distrust. The medicine had helped with the cough, but Caleb knew that as long as she kept sleeping on the streets, exposed to cold and dampness, she would never fully heal. "Where does she usually go when it rains this hard?" he asked the taxi driver, watching the city transform under the storm through the window. "Who?" The man glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Never mind, I was just thinking out loud." The overpass was almost deserted when they got there. The rain battered in sideways, making the area a poor shelter at best. Caleb searched the entire length, ignoring the water soaking his pants and expensive shoes. No sign of Ellie or Max. He tried other places where he'd run into her before, a partially covered square, the rear entrance of a commercial building, even the playground where he'd talked to those other kids. Nothing. The sky grew dark fast, even though it was still mid-afternoon. Caleb was drenched, and starting to feel the cold creeping in. "Where are you, Ellie?" he muttered to himself, standing on a nearly empty street corner. Then he noticed some commotion near a side entrance of a church, 2 blocks away. A small group of people seemed to be arguing with someone at the door. He walked closer, pulling up the hood of his coat, although he was already soaked. "We can't accept animals. It's the rule," said a man standing in the church doorway, wearing a yellow rain poncho. "The shelter stays open during the storm, but dogs need to go to the municipal kennel." "Please," said a voice he recognized immediately, even muffled by the rain. "He'll be real quiet. He won't bother anyone." Caleb quickened his pace. Ellie stood at the entrance, clutching Max to her chest. Both trembled visibly, drenched to the bone. The dog looked even thinner and more miserable with his wet fur. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," said the man, his tone kinder now. "I can't break the rules. Many people have allergies, and if I let one animal in, they'll all want—" "Ellie?" Caleb called, approaching. She turned around. Her face was pale, lips nearly blue from the cold. Max was shaking violently in her arms. "Caleb!" The surprise in her voice was clear. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he said, ignoring the man at the door and focusing on the girl. "Oh, you're freezing." "I can't leave Max," she explained, as though she needed to justify herself. "They want me to leave him at the kennel, but they kill dogs there if no one adopts them." Caleb looked at the man in the doorway, who shrugged helplessly. "Those are the shelter's rules. There's nothing we can do." "Come with me," Caleb said to Ellie. "I have a place where both of you can stay." She hesitated, looking from the man in the doorway to Caleb. "He can really come with me." "Of course he can. I would never ask you to leave him." Something on her face softened, as though a tough choice had finally been made. "Okay." Caleb called a taxi using his phone. While they waited under the church's small awning, he slipped off his coat and draped it around Ellie's shoulders, though it was already soaked. "You'll be fine," he said, seeing the apprehension in her eyes. "It's just for one night, until the storm's over." Ellie nodded but said nothing. Max had stopped trembling so much, warmed by her embrace. In the taxi, the driver grimaced when he saw the dog, but a look from Caleb and the promise of a generous tip silenced any complaint. Ellie slid as far from the door as possible, as if she feared being thrown out at any moment. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "My place," Caleb said. "It's about 20 minutes from here." She nodded again, eyes fixed on the city passing by beyond the rain-streaked window. The downpour traced hypnotic patterns on the glass. The doorman in Caleb's building could barely hide his surprise as Caleb walked through the immaculate lobby with a ragged girl and a soaking wet dog. But years of training in discretion kept him from saying anything beyond a polite, "Good afternoon, Mr. Williams." In the elevator, Ellie seemed smaller than ever. Her eyes scanned the mirrored panels, the clean carpet, the gold floor buttons. Max remained utterly quiet at her side, as though he understood they shouldn't cause trouble. "You live here?" she asked in a near whisper. "Yes, on the top floor." "Alone?" "Yes." She seemed to reflect on that for a moment. Seemed sad. The observation, from a child who didn't even have a roof over her head, took Caleb by surprise. Before he could reply, the elevator arrived at the penthouse floor, and the doors slid open directly into his apartment's entryway. The space was large and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that would normally offer a panoramic view of the city, now obscured by the storm. Designer furniture, contemporary art on the walls, a kitchen that looked rarely used, everything in shades of white, grey, and black. Ellie stopped in the middle of the living room, obviously uncomfortable, as though afraid her dirty, bare feet might blemish the immaculate floor. Max stayed glued to her side, equally quiet and watchful. "I'll grab some towels," Caleb said, suddenly realizing how alien this place must feel to her. "Make yourself at home." When he returned with the towels, Ellie was in the exact spot he'd left her, not having moved an inch. He handed one to her and knelt down to dry Max with another. "He's really well behaved," he commented, drying the dog, who accepted his attentions calmly. "He knows when he has to be," Ellie said, hesitantly drying her hair. "I don't want to bother you." "You're not bothering me," Caleb smiled. Honestly, I think this place needed a bit more life. After drying them as best he could, Caleb showed Ellie the guest room. It was spacious and just as minimalist, with a queen-size bed draped in a light grey comforter and white pillows. One wall was all glass, offering another view of the city as the storm continued. "You can stay in here," he said. "The bathroom's right there," he pointed to an adjacent door, "with clean towels, shampoo, whatever you need." Ellie glanced at the big bed, then at the floor, then at Max. "Can he get on the bed?" she asked cautiously. "Of course. It's all yours." Caleb hesitated. "I'll leave you some clothes. They're not your size, but they'll do for sleeping." "Thank you," she replied, still looking out of place in this environment. "I'll cook us something. Take a hot shower. It'll do you good. Max can have a bath too if you want." A small smile appeared on her face. "He hates baths." "But he needs one." Caleb grinned back. "I'll be in the kitchen when you're done." In the kitchen, Caleb realized he didn't have much to offer. He didn't typically cook and usually ordered takeout or ate out, but he found eggs, cheese, bread, and fruit, enough to rustle up a decent meal. While preparing a simple omelette, he heard the shower come on. He smiled at the thought of Ellie's reaction to hot, abundant water, likely a rarity in her recent life. A bit later, he heard what sounded like a small scuffle in the bathroom, Ellie probably wrestling Max into a bath. By the time he finished cooking, he waited patiently in the kitchen, not wanting to rush her. About 40 minutes later, Ellie appeared in the doorway. She was wearing one of Caleb's t-shirts, which looked more like a dress on her, with the sleeves rolled several times. Her dark hair, now clean, hung in damp curls around her face. She managed to look both older and younger at the same time, older due to the constant wariness in her eyes, younger without the dirt and exhaustion. Max followed, his fur still damp but notably cleaner. Without all that grime, he looked like a different dog. "Sit," Caleb said, indicating the tall stools at the kitchen counter. "I made eggs, and we have bread, fruit, and dog food for Max." Ellie eyed the small bowl of dog food suspiciously. "Where'd you get that?" "I asked the doorman to grab some while you guys were showering." She looked impressed. "You thought of everything." "I tried." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Ellie devoured the omelette like it was the best meal she'd ever tasted, though Caleb knew it was pretty basic. Max dug into his dog food with equal enthusiasm. "Feeling better?" Caleb asked once she'd finished. Ellie nodded. "Thanks, it tasted really good." Wasn't anything fancy, but it was warm and it tasted nice. Once more, her simple appreciation for things Caleb considered utterly basic made him question his own values. The storm still raged outside, with occasional thunderbursts illuminating the apartment. Ellie cringed each time lightning flashed. Max moved closer to her at each rumble. "Are you scared of storms?" Caleb asked. "A bit," she admitted. "On the street, you're really out in the open when there's thunder." "You're safe here," he assured her. "This building has lightning rods." "It's perfectly secure." She looked through the window, watching the flashes split the dark sky. "It's pretty when it's not drenching us." After dinner, Caleb showed her how the TV worked, the sound system, the lighting controls. Ellie took it all in with a mix of fascination and mistrust, as if she suspected some hidden catch in these luxuries. "Watch anything you like." "I'll be in my office," Caleb said, pointing to a door down the hall. "Call me if you need anything." Ellie nodded, gingerly sitting on the edge of the couch, as though she feared sinking into it. Max lay by her feet, apparently exhausted by the day's events. Hours later, when Caleb left his office, he found Ellie asleep on the floor beside the bed in the guest room, wrapped in one of the blankets, with Max curled up against her. The bed sat untouched, perfectly made. Something about that scene, the child who preferred the floor to an unfamiliar bed, the dog ever at her side, moved Caleb deeply. He grabbed another blanket and draped it over her, careful not to wake her. Max opened one eye, registered who it was, then went back to sleep. Caleb slept poorly that night. Ellie's presence in his home changed everything, making the questions about his own life sharper. How could he have so much and still feel so empty, while she, having nothing but a skinny dog, possessed an inner strength he'd never encountered before? The next morning, the storm had ended. Sunlight streamed through the windows, creating bright patches on the floor. Caleb found Ellie already awake, sitting on the floor of her room, petting Max. She looked up as he entered. "Morning," she said, with a shyness she hadn't shown before. "Morning, did you sleep well?" She nodded. "I didn't have a nightmare. Been a while." Breakfast was more cheerful than the previous night's dinner. Ellie seemed less tense, though still cautious. She took to the pancakes Caleb ordered by delivery with enthusiasm, and even smiled when he put aside a small portion on another plate for Max. "The rain's stopped," she observed, looking out the window. "Yes," Caleb acknowledged, understanding the implication. She might return to the streets. "Thanks for letting us stay. You could stay longer," he blurted out before thinking. Not just today, but for a while. Ellie eyed him, her mistrust returning. Why? A fair question. Why would a man who barely knew her offer her a place to stay? "Because I worry about you two. Because nobody should have to sleep on the street, especially a kid. And because," he hesitated, "I think we might need each other." Ellie frowned, studying him with those eyes that were too old for her face. "You don't need me. Maybe I need you more than you think." She looked down at Max, as though consulting the dog. After a moment, she turned back to Caleb. "Just for a few more days. Until my cough goes away." It was more than he dared hope for. "Deal, I'll set up the guest room better for you. We can buy some clothes that actually fit." "And stuff for Max?" "Sure. A bed, some toys, whatever he needs." A small smile lighted her features in a way Caleb hadn't yet seen. Over the following days, the apartment that had once felt like a sterile showroom gradually began to show signs of life. The guest room was transformed into a proper bedroom for Ellie, with color, a few books, new clothes in the closet. Max got his own dog bed, though he still slept beside Ellie, in a real bed now, not on the floor. They settled into a gentle routine. Caleb still went to the office but came home earlier. Ellie watched TV, read the picture books he brought, and slowly allowed herself to explore the apartment. At night, they had dinner together, now home-cooked meals, which Caleb learned to make by watching online tutorials. Ellie's cough improved quickly with proper medication, regular meals, and sleeping in a warm bed. The perpetual tension in her face started to ease. Max gained weight, his fur shone more, and he began to behave like a typical dog, playing, occasionally barking, chasing a ball around the living room. Caleb watched this transformation with an emotion he couldn't name. It wasn't quite fatherhood, he felt it was too soon for that. It was more like admiration. Ellie's resilience, her ability to adapt without losing the wary edge that had kept her alive on the streets, demonstrated a remarkable strength of character. Sometimes, he caught himself observing her as she played with Max, or watched an animal documentary with total concentration. He never forced closeness or tried to intrude, respecting her space and her pace. And in return, he saw her gradually lower her defenses. One evening, as Caleb was reading on the sofa, Ellie came over and sat next to him. Max, as always, followed and settled at her feet. "What are you reading?" she asked. "A book on architecture." She glanced at the pictures with interest. "Someday I want a place of my own," she suddenly said. "Doesn't need to be big. Just mine." It was the first time he'd heard her talk about the future, wanting something beyond mere survival. "You'll have it," Caleb said, surprising himself with how certain he sounded. Ellie leaned her head against the arm of the couch, near him but not touching. It was the closest she had voluntarily sat to him. "It's good here," she mumbled, already sounding half asleep. "Not cold." Caleb continued reading, or pretended to, as she drifted off. And in that quiet moment, with Ellie's gentle breathing and Max's occasional sigh from the floor, he realized that for the first time, his apartment actually felt warm. Friday night came with a certain routine in the apartment: pizza delivery, chocolate ice cream, and a movie of Ellie's choice. Usually something about animals. After 3 weeks of living there, she already had clear preferences. She hated olives on pizza, loved nature documentaries, and always gave Max the last bit of dessert, which he accepted politely. Caleb was surprised by how easily they had established a rhythm, His mornings, once silent and mechanical, now had the sound of small footsteps through the house, occasional barking, and unexpected questions about how things worked in the world. His once impersonal show-home apartment now bore the marks of life. A drawing on the fridge door, a dog leash hanging by the entrance, children's shoes, which Ellie only wore indoors, neatly lined up in the foyer. That evening, they sat on the sofa with a nearly empty pizza box between them, watching a whale documentary. Ellie, fascinated, kept her eyes glued to the screen as massive creatures glided through the water in surprisingly graceful movements for their size. "They sing to find each other," Ellie commented during a particularly beautiful scene. "Like they're missing each other." Caleb looked at her, impressed by the observation. "That's true. They communicate that way. My mom used to sing to me," Ellie said suddenly, her eyes still on the screen. It was the first time she had spontaneously mentioned her mother. Caleb felt his heart quicken. He tried to keep his tone steady, not wanting to push or scare her off. "Really? What did she sing?" Ellie shrugged, stroking Max, who was dozing beside her on the couch. "I don't know the name. It was something about birds." A small smile curved her lips. "She called me her little bird." Caleb felt a strange chill run down his spine. "Little bird?" Ellie nodded, biting into a piece of cold pizza. "My real name is Elisa, but she always said, 'my little bird.'" Caleb tried to keep his voice steady. "And your mom's name, do you remember?" "Victoria." Ellie finally looked away from the TV. "Victoria Mendez." The ground seemed to vanish under Caleb's feet. Victoria Mendez, a name he hadn't heard in nearly 15 years, suddenly spoken by the child he had rescued from the streets. Victoria, the dark-haired, bright-smiled girl from school. His first real love. The custodian's daughter who attended on a scholarship. A brilliant girl who dreamed of going to med school. The girl who vanished the summer they both turned 18, leaving only a note saying she needed to find her own path. "What's wrong?" Ellie asked, noticing the change in his expression. Caleb forced a smile, attempting to mask the storm swirling in his mind. "Nothing. It's just a pretty name." "She was pretty," Ellie said, turning back to the TV. "She cried a lot at night when she thought I was asleep, but during the day, she always smiled." Caleb swallowed hard. The coincidence was far too big to ignore. Victoria Mendez. The dates matched. A daughter named Elisa. Did she ever show you photos of when she was younger? Like from school?" Ellie shook her head. "We didn't have pictures, only a small one she kept in a box. But I lost it when we had to move real quick." "And your father?" Caleb asked, feeling like an intruder in Ellie's life, but unable to stop himself. Ellie shrugged, a gesture Caleb had already recognized as her defense against painful questions. "I don't know. I never met him. Mom said he was handsome and smart but couldn't stay with us." She paused. "Sometimes when she was really sad, she said I had his eyes." Caleb felt like someone had punched him in the gut. The eyes. Those same eyes that had seemed vaguely familiar from the start. Without thinking, he brought his hand to his face, touching just under his own eyes. "Ellie, Look! A baby whale," she exclaimed, pointing at the screen. Entirely absorbed again in the documentary, as though that brief window into her memories had closed. Caleb backed off. Now wasn't the moment. He had to process what this meant. He needed certainty before telling her anything. But his mind was already calculating. Ellie was about 9 years old. Victoria had disappeared almost 15 years ago. If she'd been pregnant when she left, the rest of the night went by in a blur. Ellie, unaware of his inner turmoil, remained focused on the documentary, occasionally commenting on the whales, petting Max whenever he stretched on the couch. Caleb responded automatically, his thoughts drifting thousands of miles, or really 15 years away. After he finally put Ellie to bed, part of a routine that involved checking if Max had fresh water, switching on a small nightlight in the corner, and leaving the door slightly ajar, Caleb retreated to his office and shut the door. At his desk, he opened his laptop and began a frantic search. First, he looked for Victoria Mendez across social networks. Nothing. Then, in public city records, a few hits on the name, but none matching the right age or details. Next, He broadened it to police files, hospital records, anything that might offer a clue. By around 3 in the morning, exhausted and frustrated, he closed the computer. He needed professional help, someone who could access the records that weren't publicly available. The next morning, a Saturday, Caleb woke to the sound of laughter. Ellie was playing with Max in the living room, tossing him a small rubber ball that he chased excitedly. Normally, that sight would have lifted Caleb's spirits, but now it felt loaded with questions. Ellie's eyes, the mention of her mother's name, the perfect match in ages. Little Bird, the same nickname he'd used for Vittoria, inspired by her free spirit. Morning, Ellie greeted, noticing him. Max learned to bring the ball back. That's great, Caleb said, forcing a smile. How about waffles for breakfast? While he cooked, he watched Ellie surreptitiously. Now that the possibility had taken root, he couldn't stop looking for resemblances. Her facial shape, certain mannerisms, the little frown when concentrating. I need to go out for a bit today, he said as they ate. Work stuff. On a Saturday, Ellie asked, stuffing a big piece of waffle into her mouth. Unfortunately, yes. I won't be long, though. Mrs. Martinez will stay with you. Mrs. Martinez was the housekeeper who came 3 days a week. A 60-year-old Puerto Rican grandmother with 5 grandkids, she had quickly adopted Ellie as an extra granddaughter. Ellie loved her company, especially since the woman always had some sweet treat hidden in her bag. After breakfast, Caleb showered and dressed more casually than usual. Jeans, t-shirt, sneakers. He didn't want to look like an executive for where he was going. I'll be back soon, he told Ellie, who was busy helping Mrs. Martinez fold sheets. Behave. I always behave, she said, with a small smile that dimpled her cheeks, dimples like Vittoria's. Caleb left the building and took a taxi to the area where he'd first found Ellie. It was a sunny Saturday, and the streets were busier than on weekdays. Families out strolling, street vendors, musicians. A different world from nighttime, when the same streets turned into makeshift dormitories for the homeless. He first checked the overpass, almost unrecognizable in the daylight. He found 2 men sitting by a pillar, sharing from a paper bag. Excuse me, he approached cautiously. I'm looking for someone named Marla. I think she knew my friend, Vittoria. The men looked at him with suspicion. Don't know any Vittoria, one said, but maybe Marla, the other added. Grey hair, dark skin, in her 50s. Caleb nodded, though he had no idea if that truly described Marla. The man pointed eastward. She usually hangs around the Methodist church. She's got a cart full of stuff. You can't miss her. Caleb thanked them and went in the direction indicated. The church was an old red brick building with a small side yard where a few people sat on worn-out benches. In one corner, near a tree, stood a shopping cart overflowing with plastic bags, clothes, and various items. Sitting on a bench beside it was a woman who matched the description. Curly grey hair tied in a colorful scarf, dark skin showing signs of age, somewhere around the stated age. She hummed softly as she busied herself with something in her lap. It looked like she was sewing. Excuse me, Caleb said, walking closer. Are you Marla? She looked up. Despite the tough circumstances, there was a dignity in her gaze, a clarity that surprised Caleb. Depends who's asking, she said, with a soft accent he couldn't place. My name's Caleb. I'm looking for information about someone named Vittoria Mendez. The woman narrowed her eyes, studying him. Why? Caleb hesitated, having not rehearsed a better approach. She was my friend, a long time ago. Now I'm taking care of her daughter, Ellie, and I'm trying to figure out what happened. Ellie? Marla's face softened. Little Elisa. Is she all right? Caleb's heart sped up. So she really did know Ellie. Yes. She's safe with me. I found her on the streets a few weeks ago. Marla patted the bench beside her. Sit. This story needs to be told sitting down, Caleb complied, still keeping some distance. You knew Vittoria, Marla nodded, her eyes taking on a distant gleam. I did. She was a pretty girl, far too polite for street life. You could see it. She wasn't born for that. She sighed. I met her when Elisa was around 4. Vittoria was sick, always coughing. I had a shack at the time and let them stay there for a while. What happened to her? Caleb's voice came out weaker than he intended. Marla shook her head slowly. Life on the streets wears down even the strongest, son. And Vittoria wasn't strong. She had a frail body, and her mind suffered too. Some days she'd just stare at nothing, not talking to anyone, not even the girl. Did she talk about her past, where she came from? Sometimes, when she drank a bit, talked about a good school she'd gone to, about a boy she loved. Marla shrugged. A lot of people talk about their past when they drink. Not all of it's true. So what happened to her? Caleb pressed, his heart pounding so hard he feared Marla could hear it. Marla's gaze grew more distant. One day she went out looking for work, left Elisa with me, said she had an interview. Maybe they'd get a better place to live. She paused. She never came back. She abandoned Ellie. Marla's eyes hardened. Vittoria loved that girl more than anything. If she didn't return, it was because she couldn't. Her voice grew softer. A few months later, I heard about a woman found dead by the river. The description matched, but I was never sure. Caleb felt something icy creeping down his spine. And Ellie? What happened to her then? I took care of her for nearly a year. Then I got really sick myself and ended up in the hospital. When I got out, I couldn't find her. Marla wiped away a lone tear. I searched high and low. People told me she was with a woman named Donna, but I never found that Donna. She was, Caleb confirmed. Ellie told me about Donna. She died last winter. Marla made a small sign of the cross. May God keep her. Taking care of a child on the streets is no simple task. They sat in silence for a moment. The church bells began to chime for noon. Children ran about the yard, oblivious to the conversation about lost and found lives happening just yards away. So, who are you, really? Marla asked suddenly. Why are you looking for answers now? Caleb hesitated. But there was a certain dignity about Marla that demanded honesty. I met Vittoria when we were teenagers. I think I might be Ellie's father. Marla studied him for a long moment, her wise eyes examining his face. Those eyes, she said at last. The girl has yours. Caleb swallowed hard. Vittoria never mentioned my name. Not to me. She only said the girl's father was someone she loved a lot, but they couldn't be together. He came from another world. The social gap between them had been a chasm back then. Vittoria, the custodian's daughter. Caleb, the heir to a fortune. Why didn't she ever come to me? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Marla gave a sad smile. Pride, fear, shame, who knows? People on the streets leave parts of themselves behind, like old clothes that don't fit anymore. Maybe she left behind the part of her that believed she deserved help. Caleb felt a tightness in his throat. Vittoria, brilliant, proud Vittoria, reduced to the barest survival on the streets with a small child. His child, potentially. Do you think she could still be alive? He asked, a foolish spark of hope flickering. Marla's eyes filled with profound sadness. Son, in this life, I've learned anything is possible, but I've also learned not to feed hopes that only bring more pain. She placed her calloused hands over Caleb's. If you're looking after Elisa, keep doing it. Be for her what Vittoria couldn't. Caleb nodded, unable to speak. Can I help you in any way? He finally asked. Marla smiled. You're already helping, looking after that girl, but if you can bring her to see me sometime, I'd be grateful. Of course, Caleb promised, and if you need anything. I know where the church is, Marla finished, smiling understandingly. Now go, that girl needs you. Caleb got to his feet, feeling both lighter and heavier. He took out his wallet and handed Marla a few large bills, which she accepted with a gracious nod. On the taxi ride back, the city blurred past the window. He saw it with new eyes. Somewhere in those streets, Vittoria had struggled, suffered, maybe died. Somewhere, Ellie had survived day after day until their paths crossed. When the taxi pulled up outside his building, Caleb stayed sitting a moment, trying to sort out his thoughts, readying himself to face Ellie with what he had learned. How would he tell her? When would be the right time? Should he do a DNA test first to be absolutely sure? And what if she rejected him? The doorman opened the taxi door, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Everything all right, Mr. Williams?" Caleb nodded automatically and got out. In the mirrored lobby of the luxury building, he saw his own reflection. For the first time, he looked into his eyes, searching for what he'd seen in Ellie's, and he found it. The elevator carried him silently back up to the apartment, where a girl who might be his daughter was waiting, unaware that the long-forgotten name of her mother had just changed everything. The law office waiting room oozed authority and discretion, dark wood paneling, leather armchairs, and a hush so profound it was broken only by the muted clicking of the receptionist's keyboard. Caleb glanced at his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Richard Dawson, his personal lawyer for over a decade, was never late. The fact that Caleb had been waiting 15 minutes meant something important. At last, the inner door opened, and Richard appeared, holding a folder and wearing the expression Caleb knew well, the expression of someone who'd found something significant, but not necessarily good. "Sorry for the delay, Caleb," he said, extending his hand. "I was confirming a few things over the phone." Caleb shook the lawyer's hand and followed him into the private office, even more austere than the waiting room. No personal photos or decorative items, only framed diplomas and walls of legal texts. "Did you find anything?" Caleb asked the moment the door closed behind them. Richard gestured for him to sit and took his place behind his meticulously organized desk. "Yes." Opening the folder in his hand, he continued, "It confirms your suspicions." Caleb's heart pounded. It had been 2 weeks since he'd met Marla and learned the truth about Victoria. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, watching Ellie with new eyes, silently seeking any proof that the girl now living under his roof was truly his daughter. "Here," Richard said, sliding a document across the desk. "It's the police report. A woman was hit by a bus about 5 years ago. No ID was found, so she was initially listed as Jane Doe number 27 for that year." Caleb took the document with trembling hands. The first page contained basic information: date, location, circumstances. The second page had a small, poor-quality black-and-white photo, but unmistakable: Victoria. Even with the changes wrought by time and hardship, he recognized her immediately. Her eye shape, the gentle curve of her jaw. She was thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. But it was her. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked, voice almost a whisper. Richard nodded gravely. "Fingerprints were taken back then. We compared them with the old-school records. They're a perfect match." Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, trying to absorb the impact of that confirmation. Victoria was dead, had died alone, unidentified, buried as a pauper. Meanwhile, he'd lived in his penthouse, accumulating more money than he could spend in a lifetime. How did it happen?" he finally asked. Richard consulted his notes. Witnesses said she was running across the street, apparently chasing a bus that was pulling away. Another bus was coming from the opposite direction. The driver didn't have time to brake. Did she suffer? It was instantaneous, according to the medical report. A small consolation, but a consolation nonetheless. What happened afterward? Standard procedure for unidentified indigents. The body remained in the morgue for the legally required period and then was buried in the municipal cemetery, Section 14, Grave 103. Richard paused. "We can arrange an exhumation for a DNA test to confirm your paternal link to the girl, if you like." Caleb shook his head. No need. "She's my daughter." For the first time, he said the words out loud. "The dates line up perfectly. Victoria disappeared not long after high school graduation. Ellie's 9 now. The timeline fits." A heavy silence hung in the air. Richard, normally reserved and professional, looked genuinely moved. "What do you plan to do now?" he eventually asked. Caleb lifted his gaze from the document. "I've already started the adoption process. I want it to be official, legal, airtight. No one will ever separate us again." And what about telling her the truth? The question that had weighed on him for 2 weeks. How do you explain to a child who's lost everything that you're her biological father? That you could have altered her fate if you just searched for Victoria when she vanished? That you might have spared her years of suffering and abandonment? I'll tell her. Today. Richard nodded, acknowledging the decision. Should I prepare any documentation or... No, Caleb interrupted. This is something I have to do alone. Just a father talking to his daughter. Leaving the office, Caleb carried a folder containing proof of Vittoria's death and a copy of her school records, complete with her photo at 17, the last official image before she vanished. Two women who never reconnected. The bright 17-year-old student and the unnamed indigent struck by a bus on a busy street. On his way home, he asked the driver to stop at a florist's shop. He bought a small pot of violets, Vittoria's favorite flowers, which she used to call small but brave. When he arrived at his apartment, he found Ellie sitting on the living room floor, drawing, with Max sprawled out beside her like a loyal guardian. She looked up as he entered. "Hey," she greeted him, flashing a smile that now struck him as a distant echo of Vittoria's. "Are you brought flowers?" "Yes." Caleb set the pot on the coffee table. "Violets. Very special to me." Ellie studied the small purple blooms curiously. "They're pretty. They look so perfect they seem fake." "Ellie, we need to talk about something important." Caleb sat on the sofa, close to her. "Remember telling me about your mum, Vittoria?" She nodded, suddenly serious. "I've been looking into her, trying to find out what happened." Ellie's eyes widened. "Why?" Caleb took a deep breath. "Because when you told me her name, I realized something incredible. I knew your mother, Ellie. I knew Vittoria when we were teenagers." She froze, colored pencil suspended in the air, the drawing forgotten. "How so?" "We went to the same school. She was on scholarship, the custodian's daughter. I was, well, like I am now, privileged, with money." He paused, choosing his words. "We got close in our last year. We fell in love." Ellie set down the pencil slowly, giving him her full attention. "You were boyfriend and girlfriend?" "Yes, for nearly a year, but our lives were so different. My parents disapproved. Hers did too. Then, right after we graduated, she disappeared, leaving only a note saying she had to find her own path." Ellie frowned, digesting the information. "And you never saw her again?" Caleb shook his head. "No. I should have looked harder, should have tried more. But I was young and foolish, and I assumed maybe she truly didn't want to see me. So why are you telling me now?" This was it. Caleb felt his throat go dry. "Because I believe I'm your father, Ellie." The silence that followed felt almost tangible. Ellie didn't move or speak, only stared at him with those huge eyes. His eyes, he now realized clearly. "The dates match," Caleb went on, feeling the need to fill the void. "Vittoria vanished, and you were born about 9 months later. And there are similarities. Your eyes. Some of your expressions." Ellie stayed silent. Max, sensing the tension, moved closer and rested his head on her lap. Automatically, she began petting him. "I'm not absolutely sure without a DNA test," Caleb continued, "but in my heart I know." More silence. Finally, a question. "Did she tell you about me when she left?" That question caught him off guard. He'd prepared for anger, confusion, even tears. Not that straightforward, almost grown-up query. "No, she didn't say she was pregnant." "Maybe she didn't know yet." "Or maybe she didn't want you to know," Ellie suggested, with a shrewdness that sometimes startled him. "Maybe," he conceded, thinking how that, too, tormented him. "Maybe she thought I wouldn't be a good father. Or that my family would cause problems." Ellie nodded slowly, as if it made sense. "So now, what does it change?" The starkness of her question struck a chord in him. For a child who'd lost so much, each change carried the weight of another possible abandonment. "For me, it changes everything," Caleb said, his voice trembling slightly. "But for you, only as much as you want it to. If you prefer to keep calling me Caleb, that's okay. If you need time to think, that's okay too. I'm not trying to push you." "Did you find her?" Ellie's voice was barely a whisper. "My mom?" Caleb felt a stab in his chest. This was the hardest part. "I found information about her." He opened the folder and took out the school record with the photo. "This was your mom when she was 17. He handed the photo to Ellie, whose trembling hands took it. In it, Vittoria smiled, young and brimming with hope. her dark hair draped over her shoulders, the school uniform neat. "She was so pretty," Ellie whispered, running a finger over the outline of her mother's face in the picture. "She was, and smart, too. She wanted to study medicine, help people." Ellie kept looking at the photo for a long time. Then she raised her eyes to Caleb. "So, what really happened to her?" Caleb hesitated. He'd practiced different ways of telling her, but none felt right. "Ellie, your mother died about 5 years ago. It was an accident. She was crossing a street and—" His voice faltered again. "Say it happened very fast. She didn't suffer." Ellie's face stayed blank, but a single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away, letting it fall onto the photo in her hands. "I knew," she finally said. "Not here," she pointed to her head, "but here." She touched her chest. "I knew she wasn't coming back." Caleb felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to hug her, to console her, but he respected her space and her time to process this second wave of loss. "I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you two. If I had known—" "It wasn't your fault," she cut him off, with a maturity beyond her 9 years. "My mum chose not to tell you, and then life got too hard." Caleb couldn't hold back his own tears. "Even so, I should have looked harder, should have found you both." Ellie gazed at the photo again. "She used to smile at me like that, before she got sad." She paused. "In the end, she almost never smiled." The raw honesty of her observation captured all the weight of Victoria's deterioration, from the hopeful teen in the photo to the broken woman surviving on the streets with a small child. "She loved you very much, Ellie. Marla told me how hard she tried to protect you, to give you whatever she could." "Who's Marla?" "A lady who looked after you both for a while. Tried to care for you after your mom went away." Ellie frowned, trying to remember. "The cat lady?" "No, that was Donna." She concentrated. "There was an older lady who sang. Gave me hot tea." "Yes, probably her. She remembers you. She said we can visit her any time if you'd like." Ellie nodded slowly, then turned her gaze back to Caleb. "If you're my dad, does that mean I stay here? Forever?" "If you want, yes. In fact, I've already started the legal adoption process, so nobody can take you away." "What about Max?" Even at a time like this, her main concern remained her dog. "Max stays too, of course. You two are inseparable." A faint smile flickered around Ellie's mouth. "Okay. Okay. Yes. I think—" She hesitated. "I think my mom would be glad we're together now." It was more than Caleb had hoped for. Acceptance. Not a wild burst of joy. Just a simple okay that meant far more than the word implied. He extended his hand, a cautious invitation. To his surprise, Ellie got up from the floor and sat beside him on the sofa. She didn't hug him, but let their arms touch. As always, Max hopped up as well, laying his head on her lap. "Could we plant these violets in a garden sometime?" Ellie asked, looking at the flowers. "My mom liked flowers. She always stopped to look at them when we saw any." "Absolutely. We can have an entire garden if you want," Caleb said, smiling through tears. They stayed like that for a long while, Caleb, Ellie and Max, side by side on the sofa, gazing at the little pot of violets. It wasn't an explosive reunion or a dramatic declaration of father-child love. It was something subtler, more genuine, an acknowledgement of a bond that had existed all along, even in their ignorance of it. Through their shared grief over losing Victoria in different ways, they began forming a new understanding, a new family, forged not only by blood but by the mutual decision to stay together. And for the moment, that was enough. Richard Dawson's office looked exactly as it had before. Neat, austere, smelling faintly of old books and polished wood. Yet Caleb felt different now. Richard picked up on the resolute look in his eyes immediately. "Are the papers ready?" Caleb asked bluntly as soon as he sat down. Richard opened a folder on the desk and nodded. "Everything's here. Complete adoption paperwork. Since you have biological paternity confirmed, even without a formal DNA test, that speeds up the process considerably." He adjusted his glasses. "Still, there'll be social worker visits, hearings." Doesn't matter. I'll do whatever it takes. Richard studied his client for a moment. He'd known Caleb for years, since Caleb had taken over the business after his parents' deaths. He'd watched him grow from an insecure young man into a competent businessman, but always with something missing, some emptiness no professional success could fill, until now. This is going to change your life completely, you realize, Richard observed. It already has, Caleb answered simply. He signed the documents one by one, reading each paragraph carefully. This wasn't just a legal formality, it was a commitment. With each signature, he felt both the weight of responsibility and a surprising lightness. What about financial matters? Richard asked. Do you want me to set up a trust fund for Ellie? Something she can access when she's older? Yes, but not just that. Caleb leaned back in the chair. I want to create a foundation, something that helps homeless kids, especially those who have pets. Places that accept both without splitting them up. Richard gave a faint smile, jotting down notes. In memory of Victoria. In her honor. And Ellie's and Max's, Caleb clarified, pausing. Also as a form of reparation, I guess. For all the years I wasn't there. The lawyer nodded, understanding. I'll prepare everything. When do you want to announce it? On Ellie's birthday, in 3 weeks. It'll be my gift to her. Something to show her that her story matters, and that it can help other kids. After leaving the office, Caleb didn't go straight home. He drove to the municipal cemetery, section 14, grave 103. The place was simple, no elaborate headstone, just a numbered marker. He knelt on the grass and placed a small pot of violets on the ground. I'm sorry, Victoria, he whispered, for everything, for not searching harder, for not being there when you needed me. He paused, feeling a gentle wind on his face. But I promise I'll look after our daughter. She's extraordinary, you know. Strong like you, smart like you. The silence of the cemetery felt oddly comforting, as though he could finally have a conversation that should have happened years ago. I'll tell her all about you. How brilliant you were. What you dreamed of. I don't want her to remember you just as a sad memory. I want her to know where her strength comes from. When he got back to the apartment, he found Ellie on the balcony, watching the sunset with Max at her side. Over the past few weeks, since she'd learned the truth of her parentage and about Victoria, a new sort of bond had formed between them. Not showy or sentimental, but solid, built on shared truths and small moments of mutual understanding. Hey, he said, joining her by the railing. How was your day? Ellie nodded. My art teacher said my drawing was the best in class. Caleb smiled. He'd enrolled her in a private school that had initially been reluctant to accept a student with such a spotty academic record. But after just a few weeks, the teachers saw the keen intelligence behind her shyness. May I see it? She pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. It showed 3 figures, one bigger, one smaller, and one canine. Above them, in careful lettering, were the words, my family. Caleb felt a tightness in his chest. It's lovely, Ellie. It's not perfect. Max's head is a bit too big. I think it's exactly how it should be. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the sky shift colors. Max yawned and settled at Ellie's feet, seemingly content with his world. Ellie, Caleb began, choosing his words carefully. Remember how I told you about the paperwork to make us an official family? She nodded, suddenly alert. Well, I signed them today. They're adoption papers. It means that, legally, you'd be my daughter, he said, pausing. That is, if you want. Ellie frowned, though not in alarm. She seemed to be weighing things. Even though you're my real dad, Matt, you still have to adopt me. Yes, so that everyone knows it, not just us. So nobody can take you away. She took a moment to absorb that. Will it change anything? Day to day? Not necessarily. It just makes official what we already know. And my last name, will it change? Only if you want it to, Caleb said with a gentle smile. How you could be Elisa Mendez Williams. Keep your mother's name, too. Ellie nodded, as though that made sense to her. She glanced at Max, who'd lifted his head as if following the conversation. Mister, if I stay here, can Max stay too? The question came in a soft whisper. Caleb felt a wave of tenderness. Even now, knowing he was her biological father, after weeks of living together, she still feared losing the dog who'd been her only constant companion. "You're both already here," he said firmly. "This is your home as much as mine. Nobody's separating you." A subtle shift relaxed her features. A tension she'd carried so long it had become part of her now began to lift. "All right then," she said, glancing from the drawing in her hands back up to Caleb. "Can I call you Dad?" The question was so simple it took him by surprise. He felt tears sting his eyes. "Of course you can," he said, voice husky. "It'd be an honor." Ellie slid a bit closer, not enough for a full embrace, but so their arms touched lightly as they watched the horizon. Max settled down, laying across both their feet as if sealing some unspoken pact. Caleb looked from the sky to the girl by his side, his daughter, and felt absolute certainty. He was adopting her not out of guilt or pity, but out of love. A love that had grown slowly, day by day, in quiet companionship and small acts, nourished by the daily courage he saw in her. The apartment, once too big and too empty, now felt precisely the right size for the three of them. For the family they'd become, not by obligation or circumstance, but by choice. And that, Caleb realized, was the easiest and most important decision he'd ever made. The smell of cinnamon and apples filled the apartment when Caleb got home from work. It was nearly 6 in the evening, and he'd cut a shareholders' meeting short, unthinkable just a few months ago, but now other priorities guided his life. "I'm home," he announced, leaving his briefcase in the hallway. Max came running, tail wagging wildly, as though Caleb had been gone for weeks rather than hours. Behind him, Ellie appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing an apron still too large for her small frame and a dusting of flour on her face. "We're making pie," she announced with that little half-smile that now surfaced more frequently. "Mrs. Martinez is teaching me." The housekeeper peeked out from the kitchen, smiling. "She's a natural, Mr. Williams. Her hands are perfect for kneading dough." "Can I see?" Caleb asked, stepping closer. Ellie nodded proudly, leading him into the kitchen that just months ago had barely been used beyond making instant coffee. Now, the once pristine counters showed marks of real use, containers of ingredients, recipe books, drawings on the fridge held by colorful magnets. Alive. The kitchen felt alive. On the counter sat a cooling apple pie, the crust golden and perfectly latticed. "I did the lattice," Ellie pointed out. "It's just like braiding hair, only with dough." Caleb grinned, genuinely impressed. "It looks perfect." "We'll eat it after dinner," she went on, busy storing the ingredients. "It has to cool." There was a methodical neatness in how she worked, each utensil returned to its place, each ingredient sealed away carefully. For a child who had lived with so little for so long, abundance did not translate into waste, but into a near reverence for each item. Later, after they'd had dinner and enjoyed the pie, which turned out to be delicious, not only in Caleb's biased opinion, they sat on the balcony to watch the city lights. This had become a small ritual, a shared moment of peace before bedtime. Ellie was carefully watering the potted plants that now decorated the space, violets, ferns, a small jasmine. Her latest interest was gardening, and Caleb encouraged it, bringing new pots, plant books, and small tools suited to her hands. "My teacher asked us to bring a plant on Monday," Ellie said as she spritzed the jasmine's leaves. "Can I bring this one?" "Sure. Want me to buy you a nicer pot for it?" Ellie shook her head. "No, it's used to this pot. Changing it now would stress it out." Caleb smiled at the logic. That was Ellie all over, small observations revealing a wisdom learned through abrupt losses and changes. "How was your math test?" he asked, recalling she'd studied hard the previous night. "I think I did okay," she said, taking a seat beside him. "There were a few tricky division problems, but I remembered how you showed me. I'm sure you did better than I ever did at your age. I was never great at math." She gave him a genuinely surprised look. "But you work with numbers all day." "I have a very good calculator," he joked, making her laugh, a sound still rare and precious. Maxa, who had been sniffing around a corner of the balcony, came over and flopped down at their feet, resting his head on Ellie's leg and stretching his hind legs to touch Caleb's. The dog, once so suspicious of strangers, now clearly counted Caleb among his trusted few. That night, as had happened a few times in recent weeks, Max did not follow Ellie back to her room after she went to bed. Instead, he stayed in the hallway between their rooms, like a silent guard ensuring both were safe. Their days took on a rhythm of their own. Mornings started with breakfast, Ellie's schoolwork, and Caleb dropping her off before heading to the office. Afternoons included homework, shared snacks, Max patiently waiting by the door when it was nearly time for Caleb to come home. Evenings involved dinner at the table, stories, sometimes a movie or a board game, small rituals that built, brick by brick, a new reality for the three of them. Not everything was perfect, of course. The first crisis came when Ellie came home from school with a bruised arm and a cut lip. "What happened?" Caleb asked, alarmed, kneeling to get a better look at her injuries. "Nothing," she said, looking away. "Ellie, this isn't nothing. Did someone hurt you?" She hunched her shoulders, reminding him of the wary girl he'd first seen under the overpass. For a tense moment, Caleb worried that all progress might unravel. "I don't want to talk about it." He took a deep breath, resisting the urge to press her. "All right, let's clean you up first. If you feel like talking, I'll be here." He carefully cleaned the cut on her lip and held an ice pack to the bruise. Through it all, Ellie remained silent, but didn't resist his care. Max watched anxiously, as though wanting to do something to help. Only after dinner, while she was drawing at the dining table, did Ellie finally speak. "Some girls made fun of my sneakers." Caleb, who had been reading documents on the sofa, looked up. "Your sneakers? I bought you several pairs, all good ones. Not these, the ones I didn't have." She kept drawing, not looking at him. "They asked why I didn't wear any shoes the first days of school. I said I lived on the streets with Max. They laughed and said I was lying, that nobody who lives in a penthouse was ever homeless." Caleb felt an ache in his chest. "And then? I told them I wasn't lying. Melissa called me a liar, I pushed her. She pushed me back, I fell. Then we fought." There was a stark rawness in her telling. No melodrama or self-pity, just the facts, in Ellie's usual direct way. Caleb closed his laptop and joined her at the table. "I'm sorry that happened. They were wrong to laugh at you. But I was also wrong to push her first," Ellie finished, surprising him with her self-awareness. "Yes, there are other ways to handle conflict," she nodded slowly. "On the street, you push first. Otherwise, you're the one who ends up on the ground." The brutal honesty in that statement shed more light on the world Ellie came from. A world where hesitating meant losing, and showing weakness could be dangerous. "I understand, but you're not on the street anymore, Ellie. You're safe here. You can try talking first." She considered that, pencil hovering over the paper. "And if that doesn't work? Then you find an adult, a teacher, or me. But you're not at school. I can show up if needed." He gently touched her arm, where a bruise was forming. "I'll always be by your side, no matter what." That night, Ellie had nightmares. Caleb awoke to muffled cries and ran to her room. She was sitting upright in bed, clinging to Max, trembling and sweaty. "It's okay," he whispered, sitting down beside her. "Just a bad dream." "We were on the street again," she mumbled through tears. "I couldn't find you." "I'm right here." He opened his arms in invitation, not command. To his surprise, Ellie shifted into the embrace, letting him hold her. "I won't let anyone send you back out there. Never again. This is our home now, yours, mine, and Max's." She nodded against his chest, still shaking. Max settled beside them, as if confirming Caleb's words. "Want some water? A nightlight on?" "Stay a bit," she asked, her voice small and vulnerable in a way he rarely saw. He stayed, gently stroking her hair until she fell back to sleep. Then, careful not to wake her, he returned to his own room. That night, for the first time, Max followed him, curling up not at Ellie's bedroom door but beside Caleb's bed, as if wanting to guard against any leftover nightmares. The biggest challenge came a few weeks later, when Max had to stay overnight at the vet's for an emergency surgery. He'd swallowed something, a piece of a toy probably, and needed a procedure. "Will he be okay?" Ellie asked for the 10th time, while watching the vet examine the X-ray. Yes, he'll be fine, Dr. Torres assured her. It's a simple surgery, but we need to keep him overnight for observation. Ellie's face went pale. All night? Yes, that's standard. He'll be very well looked after, I promise. In the car on the way home, Ellie was quiet, staring out the window. Caleb could practically feel her anxiety growing with each block they put between themselves and the clinic. Want to stop by in the morning before school? He offered. We can wake up earlier? She nodded but kept staring out the window. What if... she began, then stopped. What? What if he thinks we abandoned him? The question came out so softly, he almost missed it. When he understood, he felt his heart clench. Ellie's biggest fear. Abandonment. The repeating pattern that had marked her life. Max knows we'll come back, he said firmly. He trusts us just like we trust him. That night, Ellie resisted going to bed. She stayed in the living room, drawing, reading, inventing chores to keep herself busy. When she finally had no choice, she went to her room but left the door open, as though expecting Max to reappear. Caleb could hear her tossing and turning for hours. Finally, around midnight, he got up and went to her room. She was sitting on the bed, hugging her pillow. I can't sleep, she admitted. It's weird without him here. Me too. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. You know, when I was a kid and couldn't sleep, my mom used to make hot chocolate. Ellie looked at him, intrigued despite her worry. Do we have chocolate? We do. Want to try her recipe? In the kitchen, Caleb prepared 2 mugs of rich, sweet, creamy hot chocolate. They sat at the counter, blowing on the steaming liquid, comfortable in the silence between them. My mom made tea, Ellie said suddenly. When I couldn't sleep, I don't know what kind, it tasted like flowers. It was rare for her to share memories of Victoria unprompted. Caleb knew each memory was precious. Chamomile, maybe, or jasmine, he offered with a small smile. We can experiment. She sang too, Ellie said, eyes on her hot chocolate rather than him. Quietly, so the neighbors wouldn't wake up. She had a beautiful voice, Caleb remembered. When I met her, she sang in the school choir. Ellie smiled faintly. Do you remember the songs? Some of them. And, to his own surprise, Caleb began humming a soft tune. One Victoria used to sing on the rare occasions they allowed themselves to dream of a future together. When they finished the hot chocolate, Ellie seemed calmer. Caleb walked her back to her room, hoping she'd be able to sleep, but as he turned to go, he felt a small hand tug on his. Stay here, just until I fall asleep. He nodded and sat in the armchair by her bed. She dozed off quickly this time, her face finally peaceful. He stayed, watching her, pondering how they'd become so vital to each other in just a few months. Early the next morning, they visited the clinic. Max was recovering well and wagged his tail excitedly when they arrived. The relief on Ellie's face was like sunshine after a storm. When they were finally able to bring Max home 2 days later, he inspected the entire apartment, as if to make sure everything was still there. That evening, instead of sleeping in Ellie's room, he lay down in the hallway, exactly between both bedroom doors. After a moment, Ellie came out of her room carrying a pillow and a blanket. I'll sleep out here with him tonight, she declared. Caleb, passing by, smiled. Want me to bring another blanket? No, this one's warm enough. He helped her arrange a small nest on the floor. Max seemed perfectly pleased with this arrangement, settling between them when Caleb sat down for a moment. He keeps watching both doors, Ellie noted, already sounding drowsy. So he can protect us both. Yes, we're his family. He's taking care of us. And we take care of him, Ellie added with a yawn. Exactly. That's how it works. That night, once Ellie drifted off next to Max in the hallway, Caleb didn't move her to bed. Instead, he grabbed his own pillow and settled on the other side of the dog. The 3 of them slept on the floor in the corridor, Max in the middle, like a living bridge between father and daughter. And so, through apple pies and nights in the hallway, schoolyard fights and hot chocolate, the apartment came to hold not just the aroma of freshly baked bread that now often drifted from the kitchen, but the unmistakable scent of what Caleb, in his more reflective moments, recognized as happiness. A happiness built not in spite of challenges, but through them, Imperfect, sometimes clumsy, but undeniably real. The courthouse was quieter than Caleb expected, perhaps because the time slot was late afternoon, after most hearings had finished for the day. Or maybe because Judge Baldwin, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, had made a point to keep the proceedings as calm as possible for Ellie. "So, young lady," the judge said, leaning forward a little to speak directly to Ellie, "do you understand what's happening here today?" She nodded, her feet swinging above the floor of a chair much too big for her. She was wearing a navy blue dress chosen especially for the occasion, and shiny black shoes that still felt odd on her feet, so used to going without. "You're gonna say we're a real family now," she replied, her voice small but clear in the hush of the courtroom. The judge smiled. Exactly. Though, in my experience, families become families long before they reach this room. He gave a brief glance at Caleb, then turned back to Ellie. "The paperwork just confirms what you already know." The social worker, Mrs. Reynolds, who had overseen the case these last few months, observed approvingly. Her initially formal visits had become almost friendly over time, especially after Ellie's initial distrust eased, and she began showing her drawings and plants to Mrs. Reynolds, Elisa Mendez Williams. The judge read the full name on the document with a smile. "That's a very nice name." "It was my mom's name," Ellie explained, pointing to the Mendez, "and now it has his too." "A perfect way to honor them both," the judge agreed. The ceremony was brief, just as Caleb had asked, knowing that too many formalities would make Ellie uneasy. When the judge finally signed the last paper and declared the adoption officially granted, Caleb felt a quiet uncoiling of tension inside him, something he hadn't realized he was holding. It was real, permanent, official. "Congratulations to the Williams family," said the judge, offering his hand first to Caleb, then politely extending it to Ellie. She shook the judge's hand with a seriousness that made the adults smile. "Thanks for letting me keep him," she said, surprising everyone with her frankness. "It was my pleasure," the judge answered, just as sincerely. Outside the courtroom, Max waited patiently with the building's doorman, who had volunteered to watch him during the hearing. Animals weren't allowed in court unless they were service dogs. At the sight of Ellie, the dog bounded forward, tail wagging like crazy. "It's done, Max," she whispered, kneeling to hug him. "It's official now." The doorman smiled at Caleb. She explained it all to him before going in, said it was the most important day, and he had to behave even if he stayed outside. Caleb nodded, so overcome he could barely speak. Instead of celebrating in a fancy restaurant, something that would have made Ellie uncomfortable, Caleb had planned a different sort of surprise. When the car turned onto a leafy street in a residential neighborhood, far from their penthouse, Ellie looked at him curiously. "Where are we going?" "You'll see. It's a surprise." The car stopped in front of a two-story house with a big front yard. It wasn't ostentatious or lavish, but it had a welcoming, sturdy feel, with cream-colored walls and large windows. "What is this place?" Ellie asked, peering out the car window. "Let's find out." Caleb smiled, getting out of the car and opening her door. Max was the first to explore, sniffing the grass eagerly. Ellie followed more cautiously, surveying the house with growing curiosity. "Who lives here?" Caleb pulled a set of keys from his pocket and handed them to her. "We do, if you like it. It's our adoption present." Ellie's eyes went wide. She looked from the keys to the house, then back at Caleb. "Ours? The whole thing?" "All of it. There's a room for you. One for me, an office, a big living room, and the best part." He pointed toward the side yard, visible even from the front. "A backyard for your plants. And for Max to run around in." Surprise on Ellie's face slowly turned into something deeper and more profound, an understanding that this move signified something lasting, permanence, roots, a place that wasn't just temporary. "Can we go in?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "It's your house. You can enter whenever you want, however you want." Ellie studied the keys in her hand, then the front door. Instead of going straight for it, she detoured around the side yard, with Max trailing behind. The backyard was large, featuring a sturdy oak for partial shade, a sunny space perfect for a garden, and a grassy area where Max already ran in playful circles, as though he sensed it belonged to him. Caleb watched as Ellie circled the yard, touching the tree bark, gauging the soil, looking up to see how much sun there was. Her methodical assessment was so characteristic that it filled him with warmth. Eventually, she returned to where he stood. "Can we see the rest?" The inside of the house was spacious yet cozy, partly furnished, but not overly decorated. Caleb had intentionally left some areas blank, walls that could hold framed drawings, shelves waiting for plants and books, corners that might become reading nooks. "Your room's upstairs," he explained as they climbed the staircase. "And there's a surprise." Ellie's room had wide windows overlooking the yard, walls painted a soft green, and something that made her eyes shine, a small drafting table with all the tools an aspiring young artist could want. Is this for me?" she asked, edging toward it carefully. "Your art teacher said you had a lot of talent. I thought you might like to explore it more." Ellie ran her hand over the table's smooth surface, then opened a drawer to find pencils, pens, watercolors, neatly arranged. "Thank you," she said simply, but the glow in her eyes spoke volumes. They explored the rest of the house together, with Max investigating every corner. There was a kitchen with a large table where they could eat together, a living room featuring an L-shaped sofa for movie nights, and Caleb's office with an extra little desk, so Ellie could do homework while he worked. Each detail had been chosen to make their shared life easier. Back downstairs, Ellie asked if she could open her backpack. From it, she took out a rolled sheet of paper. She'd been working on a drawing in secret for weeks, and now it was finished. She sat on the bare living room floor, unrolling the paper on her lap. Caleb sat down beside her. The drawing showed 3 figures lying under what looked like a large blue blanket. The figures were clearly them, Caleb, Ellie, and Max seen from behind, gazing at what appeared to be a star-filled sky. The stars had been dotted with silver ink that shimmered faintly if the paper shifted. "It's beautiful, Ellie," Caleb said, genuinely moved by the quality and feeling in the piece. "Is it from that night in the hallway?" She nodded. "But it's not the hallway. It's how I pictured it if we could lie out in the yard looking at the stars. We can do that here, any night you want." Ellie gave a small but radiant smile, one that lit up her entire face. "I know. That's why I drew it." Caleb extended his arm in silent invitation. To his delight, Ellie moved closer and let him hug her, resting her head against his chest. "We're not alone anymore, right?" she asked quietly. The question, so simple and direct, carried all the weight of their separate, interwoven pasts. All those lonely nights they had each endured for different, equally painful reasons. Every step that had led from their first encounter through a car window to this home. "Never again," he answered, kissing the top of her head. "Never again." Max approached and lay beside them, forming a perfect circle. Through the window, the last rays of sunlight lit their new home, stretching out long shadows that seemed, to want to embrace their little family. Right there, in a place both new and already familiar, Caleb fully understood what the judge had told him. The papers only confirmed what already existed. 3 hearts that had learned to beat in sync, even though they had once kept different rhythms. The pain hadn't vanished, the scars remained. But here, in this space that would soon be filled with their memories, that pain had finally quieted. Not because it was gone, but because it had transformed into something new, something that, against all odds, they could call peace.